Good morning. I'm sure somebody must have told you this by now, but just in case, I'll let you know that my name is Michael Webster. I'm a retired United Church minister living in Saskatoon, and I've been invited by Humboldt to come and do a workshop on Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock on the topic of the Bible and homosexuality. And that's as part of your investigation of the affirming process of the United Church of Canada. And as part of that, Brenda has asked me to, if I would deliver the sermon Sunday morning, and I'm very happy to do that, very happy to be among you. The reading that we're using, the lectionary reading for today, is the first chapter of Genesis, the story of creation. It's kind of a long reading, and so I'm going to handle it a bit differently than we might usually do it. Rather than having the whole reading and then have me talk about it in one chunk, I'm going to mix it up a bit and read the first paragraph and talk about it, and then the second paragraph and talk about it, and do it that way. But before I get to that, I want to tell you a story. When I was a young man, shortly after the dinosaurs died out, I worked for a guy who owned a sand and gravel business. His name was Everett. At the time, I thought he was an old man, but it turns out he was quite a bit younger than I am now. In any case, I drove a truck for him and operated some machinery, and we, this was back in eastern Ontario, Lake Country, so we built roads into cottages and installed septic systems and that kind of stuff. The story I want to tell you is that one day we were up at Everett's sand pit, and we're having lunch in his pickup truck, and the pickup truck was pointed toward the face of the sand pit, maybe 20 or 25 feet high, whatever that is, 6 or 7 meters. And you could see in this face the different veins, the layers of material that were there. So there was very fine sand, and then a layer of coarser sand, and then some stones with a bit of dirt in them, great for road building, and then some larger stones and subsoil up there, and we'd already scraped off the topsoil and sold it. It was actually beautiful. It was like a tapestry, all these veins flowing like that. And Everett attended a very conservative church where they taught that every word of the Bible is literally true. And so as we're looking at this and having our lunch, Everett's chewing on his sandwich, he said, you know, the Bible teaches us that God created the world in 6 days. But I look at that and he said, I can see that each one of those layers took tens of thousands of years to accumulate. I took another bite of his sandwich, said, and went back to believing the biblical account, back to believing what he'd been taught by his church. You know, Mark Twain once said that faith is believing something you know perfectly well isn't true. That's not how I understand faith. That's not my faith. But I know that there are people who do hold their faith in that way. I can't do it myself. I'm reminded of John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, who devised a system for seeking authority in the world. And he turned to 4 different points, and we call that now the Wesleyan quadrilateral. And he said the first thing is Scripture. That's always first, the first among equals. And the second thing is tradition, the tradition of the church, the things that we've been taught. And the third thing is experience, our experience of the world around us. And the fourth thing is reason, what we can reason out with our minds and the knowledge that we gain. I know that many of us have perhaps come to that same point that Everett did, where you see the Bible telling you one thing, but your experience and your reason telling you something else. And what do we do about that? Well, let's go through some of this story from the first chapter of Genesis and see what we can find. It starts, in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God, or a breath of God, or the Spirit of God in the Hebrew language is just one word for those 3 things, a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. I want you to notice that in this passage, there's already water there. that in this creation story, God didn't create water. Water was there before God began creation. And why is that? Well, because in the ancient world, for these ancient people, water was a symbol of chaos. Remember that the Israelites were a dry land farming people. They'd have got along great here in Saskatchewan. A good and broad land, the Bible describes the promised land, and that describes Saskatchewan as well. So they didn't really trust water, and you can't control water. You can't dig a hole in water. You can't form water into something useful on a potter's wheel. Even damming a river to hold the water back is kind of a tricky thing. So for them, water was a symbol of chaos. All the forces of confusion and bad stuff in the world was symbolized by water. I think there must be a Bible story somewhere about somebody who goes out on a boat and there isn't a storm, but I really can't think of one offhand. Of course, Noah, that was a big storm. Jonah was thrown overboard in a storm. Jesus, every time he went in a boat, there was a big storm, and he either slept through it or he calmed the storm or he walked on the water or something that showed that he had control of the chaos, that he could hold that chaos down and be in charge of it. And the Apostle Paul also shipwrecked during a storm. So maybe there is a story about somebody going out for a nice ride in a boat, but I can't think where it is. These stories have a lot of emphasis, this creation story especially has a lot of emphasis on separation then, on separating the one thing from another and making sharp distinctions between things. And those sharp distinctions stop things from getting mixed up, stop the confusion, and that confusion is a place for chaos to get in. It's very important in a lot of these Bible stories for things to be held separate from each other. I'll talk about more of that in this afternoon's workshop. Okay. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening and there was morning the first day. That seems pretty straightforward. And then God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." Of course, I think we talk about separating the waters. Most of us think of the waters on the left and the waters on the right, but that's not what's going on here. So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were over the dome. And it was so. And God called the dome sky. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. So this is a problem. We're only in verse 6 or 7 here, and we've got a big problem already. Waters under the sky and waters over the sky. Now, this is entirely in keeping with the ancient understanding of the world. Everybody in the Bible thought the world looked like this, a flat earth covered by this kind of upside-down bowl called the sky. The sun and the moon and the stars all on the bottom of this bowl, upside down. And then above that, water. And then above the water, heaven. And if you had said to somebody in those days, "There's no water above the sky," they would have said, "Of course there's water above the sky. Where do you think rain comes from?" Well, I think probably about grade 4 now, we learned where rain comes from, evaporation and condensation and all that. And it's not that we're smarter than those people. It's that we have the advantage of the benefit of 2,500 years of accumulated knowledge about the world we live in and about the structure of the universe. We know about the solar system. Nobody in the Bible knew about the solar system. So to believe that there's water above the sky is to believe that the International Space Station doesn't exist. I mean, it's 400 kilometers up there. It's above the sky. There's no water there. When people defend the Bible's creation story as the literal truth, I never hear them insist that there really is water above the sky like the Bible says there is. Thinking about this afternoon's workshop, I know there are people who are willing to let this verse slide, who understand that the creation story is based on ancient understandings and not on modern science, but who, when the Bible turns to human sexuality and says that homosexuality is a sin, Suddenly, we have to take these ancient understandings and live them out in the modern world. But more about that this afternoon. Still, it's a problem. It's a problem to say it's in the Bible, but it's not right. The Bible is wrong about that. You know, if I'd said that when I was a kid, I'd have been kicked out of Sunday school. Because once you say the Bible is wrong about one thing, where do you stop? If it's wrong about this, maybe it's wrong about that, maybe it's wrong about everything. For people, that slippery slope argument, that once you say one thing in the Bible is wrong, where do you stop, is one of the reasons that people insist that the Bible is infallibly and literally true about everything. And it's a good point. If we can't believe that there's water above the sky, how do we read the Bible? What can we expect from the Bible? Well, if we expect it to be based on 21st century scientific knowledge, we're going to be disappointed, because it's not. The Bible is not a science text, and it was never intended to be one or to be taken as one. It's a storybook, and I say that in the very best meaning of that phrase. It's the stories about God, about people, and especially about the relationship between God and people, and stories about how we fit into this world that we live in. So let's read some more of it. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." Now we get the water left and right. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with a seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with a seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. Evening and then morning, that's an odd way to say that, isn't it? I think we would be more likely to say there was morning and then there was afternoon, the third day. But remember that for these ancient Israelites and for modern Jews, the day begins at 6 p.m. I kind of like that. I mean, for us with our Protestant work ethic, the day begins with the alarm going off, and then we drag ourselves out of bed and have a shower and downstairs and a cup of coffee and make lunch for the kids and get them out the door and get ourselves off to work. That's the beginning of our day. But if your day begins at 6 p.m., your day begins when you get off work. Your day begins when you quit work. I like that. First thing you do with your day is you have a nice relaxing meal, maybe a glass of wine, go for a walk after dinner, putz around the garden a little bit, watch a little TV, go to bed, have a good night's sleep. That's a great beginning to your day. Anyway, I originally hoped that I could go through this entire reading verse by verse, all 35 verses of it. I'm not going to have time. I don't want to outstay my welcome. So quickly, let me summarize some of what comes next in this chapter. On day 4, God hung the sun and the moon and the stars. Now remember that God had already established day and night on day 1, but now the sun and the moon and the stars are there to help, it says, help us measure the signs and seasons. And God saw that it was good. On day 5, God created all the creatures that live in the water and all the birds that fly in the air. And God saw that it was good. You know, I occasionally hear someone say that the first chapter of Genesis is a poetic rendering of creation, which is right, which I agree with. And that each day represents not 24 hours, but each day represents millions of years. And the story that's told, the creation story that's told, tells it the story in exactly the same way that the scientists tell the progression of life on Earth. No, not really. No scientist thinks that birds appeared before land animals, that creatures crawled out of the ocean and learned to fly before they learned to walk. So, that was day 5. On day 6, God created all the land animals, both wild and domestic, and God saw that it was good. Also on day 6, God created people, Verse 27. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. Now notice that in this story, men and women are created together, both created equally in the image of God. The next story, of course, has the story of Adam and Eve, and it's told a little bit differently. But in this story, the first creation story, male and female are both created in the image of God. Being in the image of God has nothing to do with our body shape, nothing to do with what's in your underwear, nothing to do with gender, nothing to do with cross-gender or transgender. We are all made in the image of God. God blessed them, the humans that he had created, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." I read that and I think, okay, God, now what? I mean, be fruitful? Check. Nearly 8 billion of us, I think we've filled the earth. Have dominion over every living thing? Check. Now, maybe we've had a little trouble subduing 1 or 2 viruses, but for the most part, we've got this planet pretty much subdued. I think the question before us as people of faith is, what do we do about creation now that we have filled it and now that we have dominion over it? But that's a topic for another sermon. And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. And then the story wraps up in the first few verses of chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the 7th day God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all the work he had done. So God blessed the 7th day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. So that's the story. And I think most of us would agree that there are parts of it that just don't fit into our 21st understanding of the world. But as I have often said, if you're asking the question about a Bible story, did it really happen that way? You're asking the wrong question. No, in this case, it didn't happen that way. But remember, this is a story, and the story is told for a reason. And it's the reason that can speak to us. The question to ask is, what does this story mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means to me. First of all, it means we are good. God made us and saw that we are good, just the way we are. Some ancient stories from other cultures make the point that we are not good, that we are part of the evil that is all of the physical world. But our faith tells us that we are good, that the world is good. And certainly that's been my experience of it. Now the next stories in Genesis, the stories of Adam and Eve and about Cain killing his brother Abel, show us that we are also capable of doing great harm, of being hurtful to ourselves, being hurtful to others, being hurtful to God's creation. And that's true too. And we have to deal all the time with the consequences of that hurtfulness. The Bible word for that hurtfulness is sin. But we are capable of dealing with our capacity for hurtfulness because at the heart of us, we are good. We are made in God's image. Second lesson I draw from this story is that chaos is all around us. God, in this story, did not destroy chaos. God didn't eliminate it or get rid of it. God just pushed it out of the way, separated it. And sometimes that chaos breaks through into our lives and brings confusion and disorder and heartache. I don't have to tell people in Humboldt that chaos can disrupt our lives with amazing suddenness, and that sometimes all the stop signs in the world can't protect us from chaos. Finally, I'm reminded in this story that God gives us space in the midst of that chaos, that separation that God made. And that whether it is disease or loss or a tractor trailer or a pandemic or whatever it is that brings chaos into our lives, God is there to walk with us in all of our hardships. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. No matter what chaos may bring to our doorstep, God is with us. We are not alone. And faith will see us through. Faith and the people around us who share our faith. And God saw that it was good. Indeed, it was very good. Thanks be to God. Amen.